大家好, I'm Martin, and this is Short Stories, brought to you by the Taichung Keda Language Center. Today's short story is called A Christmas Carol. This is a very popular story in Western countries, and it was written by Charles Dickens, so it is considered a classic. The version we are going to read today, though, is an abridged version of that story. Abridged means short. So this is a very, very short version of the classic story, A Christmas Carol. I have to be honest, I'm not a fan of this short version, but we don't have a lot of time on these videos, so we just have to work with what we have. Now I will read the vocabulary and the vocabulary example sentences. At the end of today's story, I will give you 4 listening comprehension questions. Let's get started. Vocabulary. Stubborn. Stubborn. My friend is stubborn because she never listens to other people's ideas. Employee. Employee. Facebook pays over 2,000 employees to work for them all over the world. Annoy. Annoy. My brother annoys me by playing loud music when I do my homework. Slam. Slam. My brother slammed the door after he had a fight with me. Panic. Panic. Owen panics when he loses his keys and he's late for work. Glowing. Glowing. There was a beautiful glowing sunset last night. Scratch. Scratch. Please put the CD back in the case carefully or you may scratch it. Gaze. Gaze. My history class is so boring that I usually gaze out the window. Household. Household. In the Johnson's household, there are 2 parents, 2 children, and a dog named Spud. Stuff. Stuff. I like it when Santa Claus stuffs my Christmas stocking full of candy. Grateful. Grateful. I am very grateful to my mother because she has helped me so much in life. Spirit. Spirit. Miami Heat has some skillful players, but they also need a strong spirit to play well as a team. Quilt. Quilt. In winter, it is so cold that I need a big quilt to keep me warm in bed. Fountain. Fountain. The water fountain at Sun Yat-sen Memorial Hall brings many visitors to the site. Career. Career. Shelley hopes to have a long career as a doctor after finishing university. Grief. Grief. Many people felt deep grief after Steve Jobs passed away in 2011. Funeral. Funeral. We will hold a funeral to show our respect for Gary after he died last week. Miserable. Miserable. I felt very miserable when I failed all my exams last summer. Now for the story. Ebenezer Scrooge was a mean, stubborn old man. He had no loved ones and only cared about his wealth. Scrooge especially hated Christmas. He thought it was awful. Moreover, he thought it was just an excuse for employees to ask for time off. One Christmas Eve, a hard worker, Mr. Cratchit, asked Scrooge, "Sir, could I spend the holiday with my family? My son, Tiny Tim, is very sick. This might be our last Christmas together." This annoyed Scrooge, and he shouted, "Bah, humbug!" He then slammed his office door. That night, a ghostly figure suddenly appeared before Scrooge. It was his old business partner, Jacob Marley, who died years ago. Scrooge whispered, "Jacob, is that you?" The figure said, "Yes." Scrooge began to panic and asked, "What do you want?" Jacob pointed a glowing hand at him and replied, "You are a cruel and heartless man. If you do not change, you will regret it." With that, the figure disappeared. Scrooge told himself that his mind was playing tricks on him, and then he went to bed. Later, he was woken by a voice. It said, "I am the ghost of Christmas." Scrooge pulled his quilt over his head and cried, "Leave me alone!" The ghost shook his head and said, "I have something to show you." Suddenly, they appeared in a park. Scrooge saw a young man and a woman next to a fountain. The woman was crying as the man stood up and walked away. Scrooge said, "That young man is me." "That is correct. She loved you very much, but you broke her heart when you chose your career and wealth over her," said the ghost. Scrooge was overcome with grief and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he found himself in a room. He saw in the middle of it was an old man in his sick bed. He was alone with no friends or family. When he passed away, nobody came to his funeral. "What a miserable way to die! Who was that man?" asked Scrooge. The ghost simply replied, "You!" The next moment, Scrooge found that he was back in his bed. He scratched his head and thought, was it a dream? He didn't know. However, he realized something. He wasn't proud of the way he had lived his life, and he needed to change. He gazed out his window and said, "There's still time." Back at Mr. Cratchit's household, the family was gathered for a meal. They had their share of hardships, but were happy because they had each other. Just then the front door flew open. There stood Mr. Scrooge with a Christmas goose and a bag stuffed with presents. He said, "Merry Christmas!" Scrooge then gave Mr. Cratchit an envelope and said, "Here's some money. Take Tiny Tim to get some medicine." Mr. Cratchit was grateful and thanked Scrooge from the bottom of his heart. From that day on, Scrooge became known around town for his generosity. When somebody asked him what caused this remarkable change, he only replied, "It was the work of the Christmas spirit." Now that our story is over, we can begin our questions. Question 1. Which of these words best describes Ebenezer Scrooge? A. Friendly. B. Stingy. C. Generous. D. Warm. The answer is B. Stingy. Question 2. What did the ghost of Jacob tell Scrooge? A. He told him he would soon die. B. He told him the password to his Wi-Fi. C. He told him the secret ingredient of his famous muffins. D. He warned him to change his ways. The answer is D. He warned him to change his ways. Remember, he said that Scrooge would regret it if he did not change. Question 3. What was the first thing that the ghost of Christmas showed Scrooge? A. His death. B. His birth. C. His old girlfriend. D. His old toys. The answer is C. His old girlfriend. Question 4. Why did Scrooge change his personality? A. The ghost of Christmas showed him a terrifying future if he didn't change. B. The ghost of Christmas showed him Mr. Cratchit's diary. C. The ghost of Christmas possessed Scrooge. D. The ghost of Christmas paid Scrooge to be nice. The answer is A. The ghost of Christmas showed him a terrifying future if he didn't change. Do you remember what that future was? That's right, it was Scrooge dying alone in his bed and nobody going to his funeral. Okay, so now that you have heard the story, you can see that Scrooge was a very stingy and mean man. So stingy and mean that the word Scrooge is now used to describe any kind of stingy person. So if you meet someone who's very cheap, you could call them a Scrooge. Well, thank you for watching. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.